Vault-Tec is one of the most powerful and least understood entities in the Fallout universe, not because of what it built, but because of what happened to the people who ran it. While the vaults themselves are well documented through terminals, experiments, and survivor accounts, the fate of Vault-Tec's leadership before, during, and after the Great War remains deliberately obscured. Unlike governments, militaries, or even other corporations, Vault-Tec's executives vanish almost completely from the historical record at the moment their plans are set into motion. Before the Great War, Vault-Tec positioned itself publicly as a benevolent corporation dedicated to preserving humanity. Its advertisements emphasized safety, family, and continuity. Vaults were marketed as shelters designed to protect ordinary citizens from nuclear catastrophe. Behind closed doors, however, Vault-Tec was deeply embedded within the U.S. government and the Enclave's long-term planning. This dual role allowed the company to operate with minimal oversight while gaining access to immense resources. What makes Vault-Tec's leadership mysterious is how little direct evidence exists of their personal contingency plans. While vaults were constructed across the United States, there is no confirmed record of a Vault-Tec executive vault explicitly designated for corporate leadership. This absence raises an unsettling question. Where did the people who designed the vault experiments intend to go when the bombs fell? Some terminals and logs suggest that Vault-Tec executives were meant to be absorbed into Enclave facilities rather than vaults. The Enclave, which viewed itself as the legitimate continuation of the U.S. government, relied heavily on Vault-Tec's infrastructure and data. This relationship implies that Vault-Tec leadership may not have needed separate shelters at all. Instead, they may have been folded directly into secure government installations. However, this theory introduces another mystery. If Vault-Tec leadership joined the Enclave, why are they never mentioned explicitly in Enclave records? Enclave terminals detail scientists, officers, and politicians, but corporate executives are rarely named. This omission could indicate intentional erasure, internal purges, or a deliberate effort to sever Vault-Tec's identity once its purpose was fulfilled. Another possibility is that Vault-Tec leadership never intended to survive in the conventional sense. Some interpretations suggest that Vault-Tec executives believed their role ended once the experiments began. Their focus was not on rebuilding society, but on observing controlled populations over centuries. In this view, Vault-Tec's leadership may have accepted their own extinction as part of a larger plan. This idea is supported by the nature of the Vault experiments themselves. Many experiments were designed to run autonomously, with minimal need for human oversight. Automated systems, artificial intelligence, and long-term monitoring equipment allowed vaults to function without external intervention. This suggests that Vault-Tec anticipated an absence of leadership after the war, yet there are inconsistencies. Several vaults reference instructions, updates, or interventions that imply ongoing oversight. Experiments were sometimes adjusted, aborted, or manipulated long after the war. This indicates that someone, somewhere, retained access to Vault-Tec systems. The question then becomes whether Vault-Tec leadership survived as individuals or whether they survived as systems. Artificial intelligence plays a recurring role in Fallout, from Zach's computers to the calculator. It is possible that Vault-Tec transferred its leadership functions into automated systems, allowing corporate control to persist without human presence. If this is the case, Vault-Tec leadership may not exist as people at all by the time of the games. Instead, their decisions could be carried out by programs designed to continue experiments indefinitely. This would explain why Vault-Tec feels omnipresent but invisible influential but unreachable. There is also the unsettling possibility that Vault-Tec leadership fractured before the Great War. Internal disagreement over ethics, goals, or survival strategies could have led to splintered plans. Some executives may have sought personal survival, while others committed fully to the experimental vision. This fragmentation would explain the lack of consistent evidence pointing to a single outcome. The Fallout TV series adds another layer to this mystery. It implies that Vault-Tec retained influence longer than previously assumed, possibly extending into post-war reconstruction efforts. If true, this suggests that at least part of Vault-Tec's leadership survived, either physically or institutionally. What complicates the issue further is Vault-Tec's absence as a faction in the wasteland. Unlike the Enclave or the Brotherhood of Steel, Vault-Tec does not appear as an organized post-war force. Its legacy is indirect, manifesting through vaults rather than people. This absence could mean that Vault-Tec leadership intentionally erased themselves from history to avoid accountability. Another interpretation is that Vault-Tec leadership did survive, but failed. They may have attempted to reassert control, only to be destroyed by the very chaos they helped create. Without direct records, these failures would leave little trace beyond abandoned systems and corrupted data. The idea that Vault-Tec leadership may still exist somewhere is deeply unsettling. It implies that the suffering caused by the Vault experiments was not merely a pre-war mistake, but part of an ongoing observation. The fact that no definitive answers exist keeps this possibility alive. Vault-Tec's secrecy is itself a clue. Unlike other pre-war entities that left behind identifiable ruins, Vault-Tec's physical presence is minimal. Headquarters, offices, and executive spaces are rarely explored. This absence suggests intentional removal or destruction of records related to leadership. In Fallout, absence is rarely accidental. The lack of Vault-Tec leadership evidence may be the result of deliberate design, both in-universe and narratively. Vault-Tec is meant to feel like a ghost corporation, one whose actions outlasted its creators. This ambiguity serves a thematic purpose. Fallout is a series about the consequences of decisions made by people who never live to face them. Vault-Tec leadership embodies this idea more than any other group. They designed experiments that reshaped humanity, yet their own fate is unknown. Whether Vault-Tec executives survived in bunkers, joined the Enclave, uploaded themselves into machines, or died before seeing the results of their work may never be answered definitively. The lack of closure is intentional. Vault-Tec's true power was not its leadership's survival, but its ability to act without accountability. By disappearing, Vault-Tec ensured that no one could confront the people responsible for the suffering endured inside the vaults. In the end, Vault-Tec leadership exists as a question rather than a presence. They are defined not by where they went, but by the systems they left behind. The vaults continue to operate, experiments continue to echo through generations, and the people responsible remain unseen. And perhaps that is the most unsettling outcome of all, that the architects of humanity's greatest social experiment vanished so completely that even the wasteland, filled with ghosts and ruins, cannot tell us whether they escaped, endured, or were consumed by the world they helped destroy. The vaults are often described as shelters, but that description only captures their surface function. Beneath the reassuring doors, cheerful mascots, and promises of safety, the vault system represents one of the most elaborate and morally ambiguous projects ever undertaken in the Fallout universe. While it is widely accepted that many vaults were experiments, the true purpose behind those experiments remains unclear, fragmented, and deeply contested. Officially, the Vault program was created to preserve human life in the event of nuclear war. Vault-Tec's public messaging framed the vaults as lifeboats for civilization, places where families could wait out the worst of the apocalypse and emerge to rebuild the world. This narrative was convincing enough that millions complied, often willingly subjecting themselves to rigid selection processes and lifelong confinement. However, in practice, only a small number of vaults functioned as genuine control shelters. The majority were designed with deliberate flaws, constraints, or experimental variables that had nothing to do with survival. This disparity raises the central question: if the goal was to save humanity, why sabotage the very systems meant to protect it? One explanation lies in long-term human experimentation. Many vaults were designed to test psychological, sociological, or biological variables over generations. Isolation, authoritarian control, artificial scarcity, forced diversity, enforced homogeneity, and extreme stress conditions were all tested repeatedly across different vaults. This suggests that Vault-Tec, or those directing it, was less interested in preservation and more interested in data. But data for what purpose? One prevailing theory is that the Vault experiments were meant to inform long-term off-world colonization. Under this interpretation, vaults functioned as analog environments for space travel. Closed systems, limited resources, confined populations, and multi-generational survival are all challenges associated with interstellar travel. Vaults would provide real-world data impossible to obtain through simulations alone. This theory gains traction when examining how many experiments focus on social stability, reproduction, leadership structures, and adaptability. Vaults that tested isolation or enforced hierarchy could mirror scenarios aboard colony ships or distant settlements cut off from Earth. However, this explanation has weaknesses. Many Vault experiments are so destructive that they provide little usable data for sustaining long-term populations. Vaults designed to collapse quickly or drive inhabitants to madness would not meaningfully inform colonization efforts. Instead, they seem designed to observe failure rather than success. Another interpretation suggests that the vaults were designed as a population control mechanism. Rather than preserving humanity, Vault-Tec may have been tasked with reducing it in a controlled manner. By placing large populations into isolated environments and subjecting them to lethal experiments, post-war population density could be managed more easily. This idea aligns with the Enclave's ideology. The Enclave often viewed wasteland survivors as contaminated or inferior. Vault populations, pre-selected and monitored, could serve as test subjects to determine which genetic or behavioral traits were desirable. Under this model, vaults act as filters rather than shelters. Supporting this theory is the fact that many vaults were never intended to open successfully. Some lacked functional exits. Others were designed to fail after a set period. These designs make sense if survival was not the objective. There is also the possibility that the Vault experiments were part of a broader social engineering project. By testing extreme governance models, from absolute democracy to total authoritarianism, Vault-Tec could gather data on how societies function under pressure. This knowledge could then be used to design post-war governance systems. Yet no such post-war governance system ever emerges. Instead, the wasteland remains fragmented. This suggests either that the data was never used, or that those who intended to use it never survived. A more unsettling possibility is that the Vault experiments had no singular purpose at all. Rather than a coherent plan, the Vault program may have been shaped by competing interests: corporate profit, military research, scientific curiosity, and ideological extremism. In this view, the Vaults are not a unified experiment, but a patchwork of unrelated tests driven by different agendas. This would explain the wide variation in Vault design and intent. Some experiments are subtle and long-term, others are crude and immediately lethal. Such inconsistency suggests a lack of centralized ethical oversight. The involvement of multiple government agencies further complicates matters. Vault-Tec worked with military, scientific, and intelligence organizations, each with their own priorities. Experiments may have been approved without regard for their broader implications. There is also evidence that some Vault experiments were influenced by sheer opportunism. With access to captive populations and no accountability, researchers may have pursued ideas simply because they could. The Vaults provided a controlled environment, free from legal or moral constraints. The role of automation is also significant. Many Vaults were designed to operate without human supervision. Experiments continued long after the Great War, sometimes spiraling beyond their original parameters. This raises the possibility that even Vault-Tec lost control over its own systems. In some Vaults, artificial intelligence systems made decisions based on flawed assumptions or incomplete data. Over time, these systems may have transformed experiments into something unintended, amplifying suffering without producing meaningful results. Another important question is whether the Vault experiments were ever meant to conclude. Many Vaults lack clear end conditions. They were not designed to release inhabitants after a set period. This suggests that the experiments were intended to run indefinitely. If so, the Vaults function less as shelters and more as closed ecosystems. Human lives become variables rather than individuals. This dehumanization reflects a broader Fallout theme: the reduction of people to data points in the pursuit of control. The existence of control vaults complicates this picture. Why include functional shelters at all? One explanation is comparative analysis. Control vaults provide a baseline against which experimental outcomes can be measured. Without them, data would lack context. This implies a level of scientific rigor that clashes with the brutality of many experiments. It suggests that at least some planners believed they were conducting legitimate research, however unethical. Still, the lack of clear application for the data remains troubling. No faction in Fallout appears to be actively using comprehensive Vault data to rebuild society. This absence suggests that either the data was lost, ignored, or deemed irrelevant. The Enclave's actions provide limited insight. While they access Vault data, their goals focus more on purification and control than on societal reconstruction. Vault experiments may have informed their ideology, but not their methods. It is also possible that the Vault experiments were a failure. The data may have been too fragmented, too context-specific, or too compromised by ethical violations to be useful. If so, the Vaults represent a massive investment that yielded little beyond suffering. From a narrative perspective, this ambiguity is intentional. Fallout does not present the Vault experiments as a puzzle to be solved, but as a moral indictment. The lack of purpose mirrors the emptiness of the suffering endured. The Vaults stand as monuments to a world that valued control over compassion, knowledge over wisdom. Their experiments reflect a belief that humanity could be optimized through manipulation rather than understanding. Whether the Vaults were designed for space, population control, governance research, or something else entirely may never be answered conclusively. The truth may be that there was no single purpose, only a convergence of fears, ambitions, and indifference. In the wasteland, the consequences of the Vault experiments are visible everywhere. Broken communities, distorted cultures, and lingering trauma trace back to sealed doors and hidden variables. The Vaults did not save humanity. They reshaped it in unpredictable ways. And perhaps that was the real experiment all along, not to test whether humanity could survive disaster, but to see what it would become when stripped of choice, dignity, and freedom, sealed underground, watched silently, and left to endure whatever the experiment demanded. The forced evolutionary virus, commonly known as FEV, is one of the most transformative and destructive forces in the Fallout universe. More than any weapon or machine, FEV reshapes humanity at a biological level, altering bodies, minds, and societies. Yet despite its enormous impact, the true origins of FEV, its intended purpose, and its ultimate limitations remain unresolved, scattered across partial records, conflicting experiments, and contradictory outcomes. FEV was developed before the Great War as part of secret U.S. government research into biological enhancement. Officially, it was framed as a means of improving human resilience in extreme environments. As global conflict intensified and the threat of nuclear war loomed, military scientists sought ways to create soldiers who could survive radiation, disease, and chemical exposure. FEV emerged as a potential solution to these problems. Early research into FEV focused on increasing physical strength, healing capability, and resistance to environmental hazards. Test subjects exposed to early strains showed dramatic changes, including increased muscle mass and durability. These results encouraged further experimentation, despite the virus's unpredictable side effects. However, from the beginning, FEV demonstrated instability. Subjects often experienced severe cognitive impairment, loss of identity, or uncontrolled mutation. Rather than producing uniformly enhanced humans, FEV created a wide range of outcomes, many of them catastrophic. This variability suggests that the virus was never fully understood, even by its creators. One of the central mysteries surrounding FEV is whether it was ever intended to be released beyond controlled laboratory settings. Some evidence suggests that FEV was meant strictly for research and development, not mass deployment. Other records imply that large-scale application was considered, if not actively planned. The existence of multiple FEV strains complicates the picture further. Different facilities experimented with variations of the virus, altering dosage, delivery methods, and genetic targets. These localized experiments produced divergent results, from the super mutants of the West Coast to the more aggressive, less stable mutants encountered elsewhere. This decentralization raises the question of oversight. Was there a central authority coordinating FEV research, or did individual labs operate with significant autonomy? The lack of standardized outcomes suggests the latter. Scientists pursued their own interpretations of improvement, often without clear ethical boundaries. The Master's work in Fallout 1 represents one of the most systematic attempts to harness FEV's potential. Using refined strains and controlled exposure, the Master sought to create a new form of humanity, unified, resilient, and immune to the flaws that led to the Great War. His experiments produced super mutants with increased strength and longevity, but often at the cost of intelligence and reproductive capability. The reproductive limitation of FEV is one of its most significant constraints. Most super mutants are sterile, unable to reproduce naturally. This single factor undermines the idea of FEV as a long-term solution for humanity's survival. A species that cannot reproduce cannot replace humanity, no matter how strong it becomes. Why FEV causes sterility remains unclear. It may be an unintended side effect, or it may reflect a deeper incompatibility between the virus and human reproductive systems. Some theories suggest that the virus prioritizes stability over adaptability, locking genetic structures into static forms. This limitation is not universal, however. Some subjects retain higher cognitive function, particularly those exposed to purer strains or with specific genetic traits. This variability suggests that FEV's effects are influenced heavily by individual genetic makeup. The question then becomes whether FEV could ever be refined enough to produce consistent, viable results. Despite decades of experimentation, no faction in Fallout achieves this goal. Even the Enclave's advanced research fails to overcome the virus's fundamental unpredictability. The Enclave's interest in FEV adds another layer of mystery. While they view wastelanders as contaminated, they also experiment with FEV as a potential purification or weaponization tool. This contradiction suggests internal disagreement over the virus's role. In some cases, FEV is used not to improve humanity, but to eliminate it. Weaponized strains are designed to target specific genetic markers, turning the virus into a tool of genocide rather than evolution. This shift represents a complete abandonment of FEV's original stated purpose. The widespread presence of FEV-derived creatures in the wasteland indicates that containment failed catastrophically. Facilities were breached, experiments escaped, and the virus spread beyond intended boundaries. Whether this spread was accidental or deliberate remains unclear. Another unresolved question is whether FEV exposure could ever be reversed. No confirmed case of full reversion exists. Once transformed, subjects remain altered permanently. This irreversibility suggests that FEV rewrites fundamental biological structures rather than temporarily modifying them. This permanence raises ethical implications. Those transformed by FEV lose not only their former bodies, but often their identities. Memory loss, personality shifts, and cognitive decline are common. The virus does not simply enhance, it replaces. The Master believed that this replacement was necessary. In his view, humanity's flaws were inseparable from its biology. Only by becoming something else entirely could civilization avoid repeating its mistakes. This belief frames FEV not as a cure, but as a rebirth. Yet Fallout consistently challenges this assumption. Super mutant societies struggle with stagnation, infighting, and lack of reproduction. Their enhanced bodies do not translate into sustainable cultures. Strength alone does not create stability. FEV's limits are therefore not just biological, but social. Even when individuals survive transformation, societies built around FEV struggle to function. This suggests that humanity's problems are not purely physical. The virus also blurs the line between science and ideology. Researchers project their values onto their work, defining improvement in ways that reflect their fears and ambitions. FEV becomes a mirror, amplifying the intentions of those who wield it. The mystery deepens when considering pre-war intentions. Did scientists genuinely believe FEV could save humanity, or were they pursuing knowledge without regard for application? The absence of clear long-term planning suggests a culture of experimentation detached from responsibility. Another unanswered question is whether FEV continues to evolve on its own. Long-term exposure and environmental factors may alter the virus over generations. This could explain the diversity of mutant forms encountered across different regions. If FEV is still changing, its ultimate limits remain unknown. It may yet produce outcomes unseen in the games. This possibility keeps the virus unsettling, a persistent threat that resists closure. From a narrative standpoint, FEV embodies Fallout's cautionary approach to progress. It represents the danger of seeking perfection through force rather than understanding. The virus promises improvement, but delivers distortion. FEV also challenges the idea of control. Despite extensive research, no faction fully masters it. The virus behaves unpredictably, resisting containment and defying intention. This lack of control mirrors the collapse of the world that created it. The true origin of FEV, not just where it was made, but why, remains unresolved. Was it a desperate attempt to survive nuclear war, a weapon disguised as research, or a manifestation of humanity's desire to rewrite itself? Perhaps it was all of these at once. What is clear is that FEV did not solve humanity's problems. It multiplied them. It created new beings without resolving old conflicts. It extended survival without enabling growth. In the wasteland, FEV is everywhere and nowhere. Its effects are visible, but its purpose is lost. Survivors live with the consequences without understanding the intent. And that may be the greatest mystery of all, that humanity created something powerful enough to reshape itself, yet never agreed on what it was meant to become, leaving behind a virus that endures, mutates, and lingers, long after the minds that unleashed it disappeared into the ruins of history. The Great War is the defining event of the Fallout universe, yet it is also its most carefully guarded mystery. Despite being referenced constantly across terminals, holotapes, propaganda posters, and historical records, Fallout never provides a definitive answer to a single, crucial question: who actually started it? The absence of a clear origin is not a gap in lore, but a deliberate choice that reinforces the series' themes of uncertainty, miscommunication, and systemic failure. What is known is deceptively simple. On the 23rd of October 2077, nuclear weapons were launched across the globe. Within approximately 2 hours, modern civilization was effectively destroyed. Major population centers were annihilated, governments collapsed, and the world was plunged into irreversible devastation. What is not known is who fired first, or whether first even matters. The most common assumption is that the war was initiated by either the United States or China, the two dominant superpowers of the pre-war world. Both nations were engaged in prolonged conflict, fueled by resource scarcity and ideological opposition. Oil shortages, territorial disputes, and escalating military action had pushed both sides toward open hostility long before the bombs fell. China's invasion of Alaska and the United States' counteroffensive in Anchorage marked a turning point. The conflict demonstrated how far both sides were willing to go to secure dwindling resources. The successful reclamation of Anchorage by U.S. forces, aided heavily by power armor, likely intensified desperation on the Chinese side. From this perspective, China launching first appears plausible. Facing defeat in Alaska and lacking comparable technological advantages, a nuclear strike could be interpreted as a last resort. Some in-game propaganda and military records subtly support this narrative, framing China as an aggressor willing to escalate. However, this interpretation relies heavily on biased sources. Much of the surviving pre-war information comes from American military and corporate records, which cannot be assumed to be neutral. Fallout consistently portrays pre-war America as deeply propagandized, authoritarian, and dishonest. There is equally compelling evidence suggesting that the United States may have launched first, facing internal unrest, resource collapse, and the looming failure of its economic system. The U.S. government may have seen nuclear war as inevitable. Striking first could have been viewed as a strategic necessity rather than an act of aggression. Some theories propose that the United States' increasing reliance on automated defense systems contributed to the war's outbreak. Early warning networks, artificial intelligence, and retaliatory protocols may have been designed to act faster than human decision-making. In such a system, a false alarm or misinterpreted signal could trigger catastrophic escalation. This possibility is deeply unsettling because it suggests the war may not have been a conscious decision at all. Instead, it may have been the result of systems designed to remove hesitation, acting exactly as programmed under flawed assumptions. The existence of artificial intelligence systems like ZACs and other military computers supports this interpretation. These systems were trusted with immense responsibility, yet their limitations were rarely acknowledged. Fallout repeatedly shows AI making decisions based on incomplete data, rigid logic, or outdated priorities. Another possibility is that the war was triggered by corporate interference. Major corporations like Vault-Tec, Robco, and others wielded enormous influence over government policy. Their interests did not always align with public welfare. Vault-Tec, in particular, benefited directly from nuclear war, as it justified the Vault program and ensured compliance. This leads to the disturbing theory that the Great War may have been engineered or accelerated deliberately, whether through misinformation, sabotage, or manipulation of automated systems. Corporate actors could have pushed the world toward catastrophe to serve long-term agendas. Vault-Tec's preparation is especially suspicious. The vaults were not emergency projects hastily assembled in response to sudden threats. They were meticulously planned, funded, and constructed over decades. This level of preparation implies foreknowledge, or at least expectation, of nuclear conflict. Yet even if Vault-Tec anticipated war, it does not prove they caused it. Preparation does not equal instigation. Still, the alignment between corporate readiness and global destruction raises uncomfortable questions. There is also the possibility that no single entity triggered the war. Instead, it may have been the result of cascading failures across multiple systems. Escalating tensions, automated defenses, misinformation, and human error could have converged into an unstoppable chain reaction. In this scenario, the Great War is not the result of malice, but of complexity. Too many systems were designed to respond aggressively. Too many actors assumed the worst. When one component failed, everything else followed. This interpretation aligns closely with Fallout's broader themes. The series often emphasizes how systems built without empathy or flexibility eventually collapse. The Great War becomes the ultimate example of this failure. Another unsettling detail is the war's brevity. The entire exchange lasted only hours. There was no prolonged escalation, no extended diplomatic breakdown visible in the records. This suddenness suggests that once the process began, it could not be stopped. If this is true, then identifying who launched first becomes almost irrelevant. The systems in place ensured mutual destruction regardless of intent. The war was less an event than a process reaching its inevitable conclusion. Some fringe theories propose external interference, including alien involvement. The presence of extraterrestrial technology and Zetans complicates the lore. While there is no direct evidence that aliens triggered the Great War, their observation and experimentation on humanity raises the possibility of indirect influence. Even if aliens did not cause the war, their existence reinforces Fallout's theme of human vulnerability. Humanity believed itself to be in control, only to be revealed as one actor among many in a larger universe. Another unresolved question is why no post-war faction possesses definitive records of the war's initiation. Even the Enclave, with its access to pre-war data, does not provide a clear answer. This absence suggests either deliberate deletion or systemic failure. The lack of answers also reflects the destruction of communication infrastructure. Records were lost, servers destroyed, and institutions collapsed. History itself became fragmented. From a narrative standpoint, Fallout's refusal to name a culprit is intentional. By denying closure, the series shifts focus from blame to consequence. The question is not who started the war, but why it was possible. The Great War serves as a warning rather than a mystery to be solved. It illustrates how interconnected systems can spiral beyond control when driven by fear, competition, and short-term thinking. This ambiguity also prevents moral simplification. There is no single villain to condemn. Responsibility is distributed across nations, corporations, systems, and ideologies. Everyone contributed. No one escaped the consequences. In the wasteland, survivors inherit a world shaped by decisions they did not make. The absence of clear answers mirrors their reality. They live with the aftermath, not the cause. The Great War's mystery endures because it reflects real-world anxieties. The fear that catastrophe may arise not from clear intent, but from systemic failure, resonates beyond the Fallout universe. By leaving the origin unresolved, Fallout allows the Great War to remain timeless. It is not tied to a specific ideology or nation. It is a warning applicable to any world that builds systems faster than it builds understanding. In this sense, the Great War is less about missiles and more about momentum. Once the machinery of conflict was set in motion, humanity could not stop it. The unanswered question of who fired first becomes a symbol of lost agency. By the time it mattered, no one was truly in control. And so the Great War remains an open wound in Fallout's history, not because the truth is hidden, but because the truth may be that there is no single answer, only a convergence of fear, ambition, and automation that ended the world before anyone could step back and choose differently. The Enclave presents itself as the legitimate continuation of the pre-war United States government, a claim that immediately raises a troubling question. If they truly were the inheritors of America's leadership, why does their story end in fragments, defeats, and unanswered disappearances? Across multiple Fallout games, the Enclave is struck down again and again, yet its complete extinction is never confirmed. The fate of its remaining leadership remains one of the most persistent and unsettling mysteries in the series. Before the Great War, the Enclave was not a single bunker or faction, but a network. High-ranking government officials, military officers, scientists, and corporate allies quietly separated themselves from the general population, preparing for nuclear catastrophe in secret facilities. These locations included oil rigs, underground bunkers, and secure installations designed to survive global annihilation. The Poseidon Energy oil rig in the Pacific is the most famous of these facilities. It served as a central Enclave base and housed the President of the United States, along with senior officials and scientists. From this location, the Enclave planned to reclaim the mainland and purify it of what they considered contamination. When the oil rig was destroyed during the events of Fallout 2, it appeared to be a decisive blow. The president was killed, the facility was annihilated, and the Enclave's most visible leadership was wiped out, yet the Enclave did not disappear. This is the first major clue that the Enclave's leadership was never centralized. The oil rig was important, but it was not the only command center. Other facilities existed, some of which remained hidden long after the rig's destruction. Fallout 3 introduces Raven Rock, a massive Enclave installation beneath the capital wasteland. Raven Rock housed another president, another command structure, and another vision for America's future. The existence of Raven Rock alone proves that the Enclave planned for redundancy. Leadership was distributed, not concentrated. When Raven Rock is destroyed, history appears to repeat itself. Another president is killed, another headquarters collapses, another generation of leadership is erased, and yet again, the Enclave does not fully vanish. This pattern suggests that Enclave leadership functioned more like a doctrine than a dynasty. Individual leaders were replaceable, the ideology endured. However, Fallout 3 also reveals internal fractures. Colonel Autumn, the Enclave's most prominent military leader in the capital wasteland, does not fully align with the president's genocidal plans. He seeks control rather than extermination. This ideological split hints at deeper divisions within Enclave leadership. If high-ranking leaders disagreed on fundamental goals, then the Enclave was never as unified as it appeared. Competing visions of America's future may have coexisted uneasily, waiting for moments of crisis to surface. After the destruction of Raven Rock and the defeat at Project Purity, the Enclave suffers a catastrophic loss of manpower, infrastructure, and morale. Yet scattered terminals, audio logs, and dialogue suggest that not all forces were present in the capital wasteland. Some units were deployed elsewhere. Others may have been deliberately held back. This raises the possibility that Enclave leadership anticipated failure. Redundant command structures and fallback plans may have been in place long before open conflict occurred. If so, surviving leaders may have retreated rather than perished. Fallout. New Vegas deepens the mystery. Enclave remnants appear not as a unified force, but as individuals living in isolation, hiding their identities and suppressing their pasts. These veterans were not the highest-ranking leaders, but their survival proves that escape was possible. If ordinary officers and specialists survived, it stands to reason that some leaders may have done the same. The absence of named leaders does not confirm their death. It may indicate deliberate concealment. The Enclave's defining characteristic is secrecy. Leaders who survived multiple catastrophic defeats would have every incentive to disappear rather than regroup openly. Rebuilding in secret would align perfectly with Enclave doctrine. Another possibility is that Enclave leadership fractured completely. Rather than reforming as a single faction, surviving leaders may have splintered into isolated cells, each pursuing their own interpretation of the Enclave's mission. Over time, these cells could have dissolved into obscurity. This fragmentation would explain why the Enclave never returns in full force. Without centralized leadership, ideology alone may not be enough to rebuild. The Enclave's reliance on hierarchy and authority makes decentralization especially damaging. There is also the question of whether the Enclave leadership ever intended to govern a living population. Their repeated attempts at purification suggest that leadership may have been more interested in control than stewardship. Once those plans failed, leadership may have lost its purpose. If Enclave leaders could not realize their vision of America, survival alone may not have been enough motivation to continue. Some may have chosen obscurity over futility. Technology further complicates the mystery. The Enclave possessed advanced communication systems, artificial intelligence, and data archives. Leadership could persist digitally, even if physical bodies did not. Orders, doctrines, and contingency plans could outlive individuals. This raises the unsettling possibility that Enclave leadership still exists in some non-human form. Automated systems could continue monitoring the wasteland, waiting for conditions to change. While speculative, this idea fits Fallout's recurring theme of leadership detached from humanity. The Enclave's obsession with genetic purity also invites another theory. Leadership may have prioritized lineage over position. Rather than named individuals, the Enclave may have focused on preserving bloodlines, raising successors in secrecy to one day reclaim power. If so, current wasteland societies could unknowingly include descendants of Enclave leadership, living ordinary lives until activated by circumstances or ideology. The Fallout TV series hints that pre-war elites retained influence far longer than previously assumed. While not explicitly confirming Enclave survival, it reinforces the idea that powerful groups did not simply vanish after the war. Another critical detail is the Enclave's failure to leave a legacy. Unlike the Brotherhood of Steel, which evolves and adapts, the Enclave clings to a static vision of the past. This rigidity may have doomed its leadership more than external enemies. Leadership that cannot adapt cannot survive indefinitely. Even if individuals escaped destruction, their ideology may have rendered them irrelevant in a changing wasteland. Yet, irrelevance is not the same as extinction. Fallout never confirms the death of every Enclave leader. It leaves gaps, silences, and unresolved threads. These gaps are important. They suggest that the Enclave's story is not meant to end cleanly. Like the United States it claims to represent, it dissolves into ambiguity rather than closure. The Enclave's leadership may still be alive, hiding, observing, or waiting, or it may be gone entirely, its remnants clinging to memories rather than power. Fallout deliberately refuses to answer. This uncertainty transforms the Enclave from a defeated enemy into a lingering idea. The fear is no longer that the Enclave will return as it was, but that its ideology will persist in new forms. The true mystery is not whether Enclave leaders survived, but whether their way of thinking ever truly died. The belief in purity, control, and entitlement continues to surface across the wasteland long after the Enclave's banners fall. In that sense, Enclave leadership may be both gone and everywhere, its faces erased, its names forgotten, but its worldview still echoing in the ruins. And perhaps that is the most unsettling conclusion of all, that even if the Enclave's last leader died centuries ago, the idea they embodied, that some lives matter more than others, remains one of the most persistent forces shaping the Fallout world. The Zetans are one of the strangest and most deliberately unsettling elements of the Fallout universe, not because they are aliens, but because their presence is undeniable, while their purpose remains almost entirely unexplained. Unlike many mysteries in Fallout that are obscured by lost records or conflicting accounts, the Zetans are confirmed to exist through direct encounters, physical evidence, and long-term observation of humanity. And yet, despite this confirmation, almost nothing is known about why they are here. Evidence of alien observation appears throughout Fallout long before direct contact occurs. Crashed UFOs, strange energy weapons, and unexplained abductions are scattered across the wasteland. These incidents span centuries, suggesting that the Zetans were monitoring Earth well before the Great War and continued long after it. This long timeline immediately raises questions. If the Zetans possess advanced technology capable of interstellar travel, energy weapons, and stasis fields, why do they not intervene openly? Why do they observe rather than conquer? Why do they abduct individuals instead of populations? The Zetans appear less interested in domination and more focused on study. Their behavior resembles that of researchers rather than invaders. Humans are captured, examined, stored, and released or discarded. This pattern implies data collection rather than conquest. Abduction accounts suggest a wide range of targets: soldiers, civilians, pre-war figures, post-war survivors, and even animals have been taken. This diversity suggests that the Zetans are not searching for a single trait, but observing humanity as a whole across different eras and conditions. One of the most unsettling aspects of Zetan behavior is their apparent indifference to human suffering. Abductees are often subjected to invasive procedures, suspended in stasis, or killed without explanation. There is no evidence of negotiation, communication, or ethical consideration. Humans are treated as specimens. The Mothership Zeta encounter confirms this interpretation. Humans from vastly different time periods are held aboard the ship, some preserved for centuries. This demonstrates that the Zetans are not merely reactive observers. They maintain long-term research programs that span generations. The existence of pre-war abductees alongside post-war captives indicates that the Zetans did not arrive after the Great War. They were present before it, watching humanity at its technological peak and its collapse. This raises a disturbing possibility. The Zetans may have anticipated the Great War. Their continued presence before, during, and after suggests they were prepared to observe humanity's destruction as part of a larger study. Whether the Zetans influenced the Great War remains unclear. There is no direct evidence that they caused it, but their advanced technology makes non-intervention a choice rather than a limitation. If they wanted to prevent the war, they likely could have. This leads to the question of motive. Why would a species capable of intervening choose not to? One explanation is non-interference, a self-imposed rule designed to preserve natural development. Another is apathy. Humanity's survival may simply not matter to them. There is also the possibility that the Great War itself was part of what interested them. The rapid collapse of a technologically advanced civilization could provide valuable data. Observing how a species responds to self-inflicted extinction may be rare on a cosmic scale. The Zetans' technology reinforces this idea. Their weapons are precise, efficient, and unfamiliar. They do not resemble human designs. This suggests an entirely separate technological evolution, one that does not prioritize brute force or mass destruction. Zetan weapons incapacitate rather than annihilate. Stasis fields freeze targets in place. Energy weapons disintegrate with minimal collateral damage. This supports the idea that Zetans seek control over chaos, not chaos itself. Their spacecraft further reinforces this impression. The Mothership Zeta is vast, but its interior is not designed for conquest. There are no signs of troop deployment bays or planetary assault systems. Instead, the ship is filled with containment chambers, research labs, and observation areas. The Zetans appear to operate in small numbers. There is no evidence of a large alien population or invasion force. This suggests that they may be a specialized research group rather than representatives of their entire species. This interpretation introduces another mystery. Are the Zetans explorers, scientists, or something else entirely? Their behavior aligns closely with scientific observation, but their lack of communication and ethical consideration sets them apart from human researchers. They do not explain their work. They do not seek consent. They do not justify their actions. This silence makes it impossible to understand their internal logic. The absence of Zetan communication is particularly important. They clearly understand human physiology and technology to some degree, yet make no attempt to communicate meaningfully. This implies either that they do not value communication or that they do not see humans as equals worth addressing. This dynamic reinforces Fallout's theme of power imbalance. Humanity once believed itself to be the dominant force on Earth. The Zetans quietly undermine that belief, revealing humanity as just another subject of observation. The existence of Zetans also reframes human exceptionalism. Fallout often critiques the idea that humanity is uniquely important or destined for dominance. The Zetan's presence suggests that humanity's rise and fall may be insignificant in a larger cosmic context. Another unresolved question is whether the Zetans are unified in purpose. The consistent behavior observed across centuries suggests coordination, but it is unclear whether individual Zetans act autonomously or follow centralized directives. If centralized control exists, then their long-term observation of Earth is intentional and organized. If not, then their behavior may reflect cultural norms rather than specific objectives. There is also the question of scale. Earth may not be the only planet under observation. Humanity could be one of many species studied by the Zetans. If so, the lack of intervention becomes less personal and more procedural. This idea further diminishes humanity's perceived importance. The Great War may have been tragic for humans, but merely interesting for observers. The Zetans' continued presence after the war suggests they are not discouraged by collapse. In fact, they may be more interested in post-war humanity than pre-war civilization. The contrast between the two provides valuable comparative data. Post-war humanity adapts, fragments, and survives under extreme conditions. This resilience may be as compelling to the Zetans as humanity's self-destruction. There is also the possibility that the Zetans are not entirely detached. Some encounters imply curiosity rather than hostility. However, curiosity without empathy is still dangerous. The mystery deepens when considering how little Zetan technology influences the wider wasteland. Despite its advanced nature, it does not spread. This suggests that Zetans tightly control their artifacts, preventing technological contamination. This restraint implies long-term planning. The Zetans are careful not to alter the variables they observe too drastically. If this is true, then the Zetans may be one of the few entities in Fallout actively avoiding escalation. While humans respond to crisis with increased violence and control, the Zetans remain distant and measured. This contrast is unsettling. It suggests that the most powerful observers are the least emotionally invested. The identity of the Zetans, therefore, may be less important than their role. They serve as a reminder that humanity is not alone, not exceptional, and not in control of the universe it inhabits. Their silence is their most powerful statement. By refusing to explain themselves, they force humanity to confront its own insignificance. Whether the Zetans will ever reveal their purpose remains unknown, Fallout offers no resolution, only fragments. And perhaps that is intentional. The Zetans are not meant to be understood. They exist to destabilize certainty, to remind players that even in a world defined by ruin, there are forces far beyond human comprehension, quietly watching, recording, and waiting, not to save humanity, not to destroy it, but simply to observe what it does next. The Master is one of the most complex figures in the Fallout universe, not because of what he became, but because of what he was trying to accomplish. Often remembered as a grotesque antagonist driven mad by mutation, the Master's original plan was far more deliberate, philosophical, and unsettling than it first appears. Even after his defeat, questions remain about whether his vision was entirely wrong or simply incomplete. Before becoming the entity known as the Master, he was a human named Richard Gray, a member of a pre-war expedition exploring the ruins of the Mariposa military base. This base housed one of the earliest and most extensive forced evolutionary virus research facilities. Gray's accidental exposure to FEV did not merely transform his body, it fundamentally altered his cognition, perspective, and sense of purpose. Unlike many who were exposed to FEV, Gray retained and even expanded his intellectual capacity. His mind became distributed across multiple neural structures, merging with machines and organic matter. This transformation gave him access to vast amounts of data and a perception of humanity that was both analytical and detached. From this altered state, the Master came to a conclusion that would define his actions. Humanity, as it existed, was incapable of surviving its own flaws. War, greed, tribalism, and competition had destroyed the world once and would do so again. To the Master, this was not speculation, but evidence-based reasoning. His solution was radical but internally consistent. Humanity had to change at a fundamental level, not culturally, not politically. Biologically, the Master believed that by transforming humans into supermutants through FEV, he could eliminate the traits that led to conflict. Supermutants were stronger, more durable, and immune to radiation. They could survive in the wasteland without fear of disease or environmental collapse. In theory, they represented a next step in evolution. Crucially, the Master did not view this transformation as cruelty. He viewed it as salvation. In his mind, individual suffering was outweighed by species-level survival. This utilitarian logic underpinned every aspect of his plan. The Master envisioned a unified species, free from internal divisions. Supermutants would not fight over resources in the same way humans did. Their enhanced bodies would reduce competition, and their shared condition would eliminate the concept of otherness. This vision challenges the simplistic portrayal of the Master as insane. His logic is flawed, but it is not irrational. It is a response to historical failure, grounded in observation rather than malice. However, the Master's plan contained a fatal flaw: sterility. Supermutants created through FEV were unable to reproduce. This limitation undermined the long-term viability of his new species. A society that cannot reproduce cannot replace itself. What remains unclear is whether the Master knew this limitation from the beginning. Some evidence suggests he was aware of it only after significant experimentation. Others imply he believed the issue could be solved with refinement. If the Master did not know about sterility initially, then his plan was based on incomplete data. This would make his project a tragic mistake, rather than deliberate doom. If he did know, then his willingness to proceed anyway raises deeper ethical concerns. Another unresolved question is whether the Master believed humans should be eliminated entirely or merely transformed gradually. Some of his actions suggest he intended coexistence during a transition period. Others imply eventual replacement. This ambiguity is important. It suggests that even the Master's own vision may not have been fully defined. His plan evolved as he did, shaped by ongoing experimentation and shifting priorities. The Master's use of force further complicates his philosophy. While he claimed to act in humanity's best interest, he did not seek consent. Humans were captured, experimented on, and transformed against their will. This contradiction undermines his moral argument. Yet from the Master's perspective, consent was irrelevant. Humanity had already proven incapable of making choices that ensured its survival. Removing choice was, in his view, a necessary correction. This belief places the Master within a broader Fallout theme, the danger of technocratic certainty. When individuals believe they alone understand what is best for humanity, violence becomes justifiable. The Master's downfall comes when his core assumption is challenged. When confronted with evidence that super mutants cannot reproduce, his vision collapses. Without continuity, his new species is doomed to extinction. This moment is crucial. It reveals that the Master's plan was not driven by ego or domination, but by belief. When that belief is disproven, he does not double down. He ends his project. This response distinguishes the Master from many Fallout antagonists. He is capable of reflection and self-termination when faced with incontrovertible evidence. This suggests that he was not fully detached from reason. The tragedy of the Master lies in this moment of realization. He was wrong, not because his goals were malicious, but because his solution was incomplete. He sought to solve human conflict through biological uniformity, ignoring the complexity of culture, emotion, and reproduction. Another lingering mystery is whether the Master's plan could ever have worked with sufficient refinement. If sterility could be overcome, would a unified mutant species have avoided humanity's mistakes? Fallout never answers this question definitively. Super mutant societies encountered later in the series suggest that mutation alone does not eliminate conflict. Super mutants fight, form hierarchies, and struggle with identity. This implies that the Master underestimated the persistence of social dynamics. However, these later mutants are often the result of degraded FEV strains and incomplete guidance. It is possible that the Master's original mutants, under centralized leadership, would have developed differently. This possibility remains unsettling. It suggests that the Master's failure may not have been ideological, but technical, that with better data, his plan might have succeeded. Fallout deliberately leaves this unresolved. The Master's plan is not dismissed as nonsense. It is dismantled carefully, piece by piece, through evidence rather than force. This narrative choice reinforces Fallout's nuanced approach to morality. The Master is not a cartoon villain. He is a product of desperation, trauma, and misplaced certainty. His existence forces players to confront uncomfortable questions. Is survival worth sacrificing individuality? Is unity worth enforced transformation? Is humanity defined by its flaws or by its ability to choose despite them? The Master believed choice was the problem. Fallout suggests that removing choice is worse. Yet the wasteland continues to struggle with the same issues the Master sought to eliminate. Conflict, division, and scarcity persist. His failure does not resolve these problems. This leaves his legacy unresolved. The Master was wrong, but the world remains broken. The true mystery of the Master's plan is not whether it would have worked, but whether humanity has found a better alternative. Fallout offers no clear answer. In the end, the Master stands as one of Fallout's most haunting figures because he represents a path not taken and perhaps not fully rejected. His plan was a mirror held up to humanity's fear of itself. And long after his voice falls silent, the question he raised continues to echo through the wasteland. If humanity keeps destroying itself, at what point does survival demand becoming something else entirely? The Fallout games present the world in fragments. Each title reveals a carefully defined region, dense with history, conflict, and consequence, while leaving the rest of the planet largely untouched. This design choice creates one of the most persistent mysteries in the series. What lies beyond the borders of the maps we explore? The absence of information is not accidental. It invites speculation, unease, and a sense that the wasteland extends far beyond what the player can see. Every Fallout map implies a larger world continuing just past the edge of the playable space. Roads disappear into the horizon. Radio signals fade. Dialogue references places that are never visited. These hints suggest that civilization did not end uniformly and that vastly different outcomes may exist elsewhere. One of the few things known for certain is that the Great War was global. Nuclear weapons were exchanged across continents, not confined to the United States. This means that the devastation seen in the American wastelands is not unique. However, the intensity, targets, and long-term effects of the war likely varied from region to region. The United States was heavily targeted due to its military and economic dominance. Many of its cities were strategic targets, leading to widespread annihilation. Other regions may not have experienced the same level of destruction. This raises the possibility that parts of the world remain less damaged, or at least damaged differently. Europe, for example, is almost entirely absent from Fallout's direct depiction. Pre-war lore suggests that Europe collapsed earlier than the United States due to resource wars and economic instability. By the time the Great War occurred, much of Europe may already have been fragmented. Nuclear exchange may have worsened the situation, or it may have simply sealed an already collapsing system. If Europe fell earlier, its post-war societies could be radically different. They may have adapted to scarcity long before nuclear devastation, potentially resulting in cultures more accustomed to collapse and survival. Asia, particularly China, is another major unknown. As the United States' primary rival, China was heavily involved in pre-war conflict. Its cities were likely targeted extensively. However, the scale and effectiveness of those strikes remain unclear. China's vast population and geography could have produced regions that survived in isolation. The question of China's post-war state is especially intriguing because it would reflect the other side of the conflict. Fallout is largely told through an American lens, filled with propaganda and bias. A Chinese wasteland might tell a very different story of the Great War. Beyond major powers, there are countless regions that receive no attention at all. Africa, South America, and large parts of Asia are almost completely absent from Fallout's lore. These regions may have been spared direct strikes due to their limited strategic value, or they may have suffered in ways unrelated to nuclear weapons. Environmental consequences alone would have reshaped these regions. Fallout patterns, climate disruption, and resource collapse would affect agriculture and ecosystems worldwide. Even areas untouched by bombs would not escape the consequences. This leads to a broader mystery. Is the wasteland uniform, or deeply varied. The environments shown in Fallout games range from deserts to swamps to frozen mountains. This variety hints that the post-war world is not a single type of ruin, but a patchwork of outcomes shaped by geography and history. Within the United States itself, there are vast unexplored areas. Entire states and regions are referenced but never visited. The Midwest, the Deep South, the Pacific Northwest, and the Great Plains all exist largely as narrative blanks. Fallout Tactics provides a limited glimpse into the Midwest, suggesting that different factions, technologies, and social structures developed independently. This alone implies that the broader world is far from static. If different regions developed independently for centuries, their cultures could be unrecognizable compared to those shown in the main games. Languages may have shifted. Belief systems may have evolved. Technology may have been preserved or abandoned in unexpected ways. One of the most intriguing possibilities is that some regions may have recovered more successfully than others. Fallout often portrays stagnation, but this may be a regional phenomenon rather than a universal one. Certain areas might have rebuilt quietly, avoiding the militarization and factionalism that dominate the known wastelands. Without access to power armor, FEV, or advanced weaponry, these societies may have focused on agriculture, trade, and stability. If such regions exist, their absence from the games raises questions. Are they deliberately isolated? Do they avoid contact with the outside world? Or are they simply beyond the reach of the stories being told? The existence of long-distance trade caravans suggests that some form of interregional contact exists. Caravans reference distant places, implying travel routes that extend far beyond the maps. These routes must lead somewhere. Another unresolved mystery is the state of the oceans. Fallout largely avoids maritime exploration, yet oceans cover most of the planet. Naval vessels, submarines, and offshore installations existed before the war. Some of these may still be operational or inhabited. Underwater habitats, island communities, or mobile sea-based societies are all plausible within Fallout's technological framework. The lack of exploration in this area leaves enormous narrative potential untapped. Space also remains largely unexplored post-war. Pre-war programs aimed at space exploration existed, and some facilities may have survived. Satellites, space stations, or off-world installations could still exist, isolated from Earth's collapse. If humanity reached space before the war in any meaningful capacity, those populations may have developed entirely separate trajectories. This possibility directly connects back to the Vault experiments and their rumored links to space colonization. Another factor shaping the unknown world is mutation. Radiation affects ecosystems differently depending on local conditions. Flora and fauna beyond known maps may be vastly different, adapted to unique environments and hazards. These differences would shape human societies in turn. Diets, architecture, and movement patterns would adapt to local threats. The wasteland beyond may be unrecognizable compared to familiar regions. The absence of centralized communication ensures that these societies remain isolated. Without global networks, information travels slowly, if at all. Myths and rumors replace knowledge. The wider world becomes a collection of legends. This fragmentation of knowledge reinforces Fallout's atmosphere. The world feels larger because it is unknown. The edges of the map are not boundaries, but veils. Fallout also hints that some regions may be worse than those depicted. The known wastelands may not be the worst-case scenarios. There may be areas so contaminated or hostile that no society could persist there. Conversely, there may be refuges where the war's impact was minimal. These places could represent alternate futures, paths humanity might have taken if circumstances had been slightly different. The lack of confirmation allows all of these possibilities to coexist. Fallout does not provide a definitive global state, because doing so would collapse its sense of scale and mystery. From a thematic standpoint, the unknown world reflects humanity's loss of global perspective. Before the war, the world was interconnected. After it, people know only what they can reach. This loss of perspective reinforces parochial thinking. Factions believe their struggles are universal, unaware that entirely different realities may exist elsewhere. The idea that the world beyond might be better or worse creates quiet tension. It suggests that the wasteland's suffering is not inevitable, but contingent. Fallout repeatedly asks whether humanity is doomed to repeat its mistakes. The unknown world offers both hope and dread. Somewhere, people may have learned. Somewhere else, they may have fallen further. The mystery is never resolved because it does not need to be. The unknown world is a mirror for the player's imagination, shaped by fears and hopes. In this way, the space beyond known maps becomes one of Fallout's most powerful narrative tools. It reminds us that no matter how much we explore, there is always more beyond our understanding. The wasteland feels endless not because it is empty, but because it is unfinished. And perhaps that is the point. Fallout is not about seeing everything. It is about living in the aftermath of a world too large, too complex, and too interconnected to ever be fully understood again, a world whose greatest mysteries begin exactly where the map ends. Mr. Robert Edwin House is one of the most enigmatic figures in the Fallout universe, not because his plans are hidden, but because they are so far-reaching that their true scope is easy to underestimate. Unlike many post-war leaders who struggle to survive day to day, Mr. House thinks in centuries. His long-term goal extends beyond the Mojave, beyond political control, and even beyond Earth itself. Yet, despite his confidence and preparation, the ultimate purpose of his vision remains open to interpretation. Before the Great War, Mr. House was already a titan of industry. As the founder and head of Robco Industries, he amassed vast wealth and influence through robotics, artificial intelligence, and defense contracts. Unlike most corporate leaders, House did not rely on optimism or denial when facing the inevitability of nuclear war. He calculated it, he predicted it, and he prepared for it. House's preparations for the Great War were unprecedented. He diverted enormous resources into the defense of Las Vegas, installing missile defense systems that successfully intercepted the majority of incoming warheads. While much of the surrounding region was devastated, Las Vegas survived largely intact, becoming the new Vegas Strip. This alone distinguishes House from other pre-war elites. He did not merely survive the war, he outplanned it. After the war, House placed himself into a life-preserving system, suspending his body while maintaining his mind through advanced machinery. This decision reveals a key aspect of his long-term thinking. House does not trust succession. He does not believe institutions outlast individuals. He believes continuity requires personal survival. This choice sets him apart from factions like the Enclave or Brotherhood of Steel. While they rely on ideology and hierarchy, House relies on calculation and control. His body becomes irrelevant. His mind becomes the governing force. House's immediate post-war goal was stability. He did not attempt to conquer the wasteland or rebuild society overnight. Instead, he waited. He monitored. He allowed the chaos to burn itself out. This patience is central to understanding his long-term vision. House believed that humanity needed time to exhaust its destructive impulses before it could be guided toward progress. In his view, early intervention would fail. Only after society reached a low point could it be reshaped effectively. This belief is reflected in how House treats the Mojave's factions. He does not seek their destruction unless necessary. Instead, he positions himself as an inevitable authority, offering protection and prosperity in exchange for compliance. The Securitron army is a manifestation of this philosophy. Unlike human soldiers, Securitrons are loyal, efficient, and predictable. They do not rebel. They do not age. They do not question orders. For House, automation is not just convenience, it is reliability. By relying on machines rather than people, House minimizes uncertainty. His control does not depend on belief or morale. It depends on maintenance and power. House's relationship with the New Vegas Strip is also telling. He preserves it as a symbol of pre-war excess, entertainment, and order. The Strip becomes a controlled environment where chaos is excluded and rules are enforced absolutely. This controlled preservation is not nostalgia, it is demonstration. House uses New Vegas to show what stability looks like. He creates a model society within a hostile world, proving that order is possible if properly managed. However, House's ambitions do not stop at the Mojave. His long-term plans explicitly include space exploration and off-world expansion. He views Earth as compromised, permanently damaged by humanity's past mistakes. To House, the future of humanity lies beyond the planet that nearly destroyed itself. This is not escapism, it is continuity. House believes that to ensure humanity's survival, it must expand beyond the conditions that produced the Great War. Space represents both opportunity and reset. His interest in technology, automation, and long-term planning aligns perfectly with this goal. Space travel requires closed systems, strict resource management, and centralized control, all things House excels at designing. House's plan suggests that New Vegas is not the end goal, but a proving ground. It is where he refines governance, technology, and logistics before scaling them up. Yet there is ambiguity in whether House's plan truly benefits humanity or merely preserves his vision of it. His governance model leaves little room for dissent. Freedom is secondary to stability. Choice is constrained by necessity. House does not seek to empower people, he seeks to manage them. This raises the question of whether his future is humane or merely efficient. House's critics argue that his vision replaces one form of tyranny with another. While he avoids ideological extremism, he enforces absolute authority. There is no democratic process. There is no accountability beyond his own judgment. House would argue that democracy failed. The pre-war world collapsed despite its institutions. In his view, humanity has proven incapable of governing itself responsibly. Centralized control is not oppression, but correction. This belief places House within a recurring Fallout theme, the tension between freedom and survival. House chooses survival, even if it means sacrificing autonomy. The mystery lies in whether House is right. House's calculations are logical, but they are not empathetic. He views humanity statistically. Lives are variables. Stability is the objective function. This perspective mirrors the mindset that produced the Vault experiments and other pre-war atrocities. The difference is that House acknowledges the cost and accepts it openly. Another unresolved question is whether House can truly adapt. His thinking is shaped by pre-war assumptions. While he anticipates technological challenges, he may underestimate cultural evolution. The wasteland's inhabitants are not simply broken pre-war citizens, they have developed new values, identities, and survival strategies. House's rigid system may struggle to accommodate this diversity. House's reliance on ancient infrastructure also introduces risk. His systems are durable but not indestructible. A single catastrophic failure could undo centuries of planning. There is also the question of succession. House has no successor. If his systems fail, his vision ends with him. This fragility contradicts his desire for permanence. Yet House seems unconcerned by this. His confidence suggests he believes his systems are sufficient, or that humanity does not deserve a future without him. The Fallout narrative deliberately leaves House's long-term goal unresolved. Depending on player choice, his vision may succeed, stall, or collapse. This variability reinforces the ambiguity of his plan. House may be humanity's best hope for long-term survival, or he may be another relic of a world that valued control over compassion. What makes House compelling is that his plan is not overtly evil. It is cold, calculated, and plausible. It asks uncomfortable questions about whether humanity deserves freedom if it cannot wield it responsibly. House's ultimate goal is not domination. It is continuation. He wants humanity to persist, even if it means becoming something more controlled, more managed, and less free. Whether that future is worth pursuing remains unanswered. In the quiet glow of New Vegas, beneath flickering neon and ancient machines, House waits patiently. He is not racing against time. He is shaping it. And as long as he endures, the future of humanity remains suspended between two possibilities: a carefully guided ascent toward the stars, or another carefully planned mistake, elegant, efficient, and ultimately as flawed as the world that came before it. At a glance, the Fallout wasteland appears frozen in time. Rusted cars sit where they were abandoned centuries ago. Pre-war buildings crumble but are never replaced. Technology from the old world remains in use long after the people who built it are gone. This surface-level stagnation raises one of the most important and quietly unsettling questions in the series. Is humanity actually recovering, or merely surviving in an extended aftermath that feels like progress only because the worst has already happened? Recovery implies direction. It suggests movement towards stability, growth, and continuity. Survival, by contrast, is static. It is the act of enduring, without fundamentally changing the conditions that threaten existence. Fallout deliberately blurs the line between these two states, making it difficult to tell whether the world is healing or simply persisting. There are clear signs of recovery scattered throughout the wasteland. Settlements exist. Trade routes function. Agriculture has returned in limited forms. People are born who have never seen the pre-war world. Cultures, however fragmented, have formed their own identities rather than relying entirely on the past. In places like Shady Sands, Rivet City, Diamond City, and New Vegas, elements of organized society re-emerge. Laws exist. Currency circulates. Infrastructure is repaired, if only partially. These developments suggest that humanity is not merely clinging to life, but attempting to rebuild. Yet these examples are isolated. For every functioning settlement, there are dozens of ruins filled with scavengers and raiders. Stability exists in pockets, separated by vast stretches of danger. This uneven recovery suggests that progress is fragile and easily reversed. One of the most telling signs of stalled recovery is humanity's relationship with pre-war technology. Rather than creating new systems, Most societies rely on scavenging old ones. Weapons, armor, medical equipment, and even food production often depend on rediscovered relics rather than innovation. This reliance on the past creates a loop. Progress becomes maintenance rather than advancement. Civilization is preserved, not reinvented. In a recovering world, innovation would gradually replace scavenging. New technologies would emerge, adapted to post-war conditions. Instead, the wasteland remains defined by the remnants of a civilization that destroyed itself. The persistence of old-world ideologies further complicates the picture. Factions like the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, and remnants of pre-war governments cling to the symbols, hierarchies, and assumptions of the past. Rather than learning from history, they attempt to resurrect it. This ideological stagnation mirrors the physical stagnation of the world. When societies define themselves by what they were instead of what they could become, recovery slows. Violence is another indicator. Raider activity remains widespread centuries after the war. If humanity were truly recovering, such constant lawlessness would diminish over time. Instead, it persists as a defining feature of the wasteland. This suggests that social structures remain too weak to suppress chaos on a large scale. Order exists locally, but not regionally or globally. The question of population growth also matters. While people continue to be born, the overall population appears low and unevenly distributed. Large-scale population recovery would require stable food production, healthcare, and long-term planning, all of which remain limited. Radiation and mutation continue to affect both humans and the environment. These conditions complicate recovery by introducing ongoing threats that pre-war humanity never had to manage. Recovery is not simply rebuilding what was lost, but adapting to a fundamentally altered world. Some factions attempt this adaptation more successfully than others. Agricultural communities experiment with mutated crops. Doctors develop treatments using salvaged knowledge. Traders create networks that span dangerous territory. These efforts demonstrate resilience, but resilience alone does not guarantee recovery. Adaptation without coordination can lead to survival without progress. One of the most significant obstacles to recovery is the absence of shared knowledge. Pre-war humanity relied on global communication networks, standardized education, and centralized institutions. In Fallout, knowledge is fragmented. Information exists in terminals, books, and individuals' memories, but rarely spreads widely. Without shared understanding, each settlement must rediscover solutions independently. This redundancy slows progress dramatically. Education is especially scarce. Few children receive structured learning beyond immediate survival skills. Without education, technological and cultural advancement becomes difficult to sustain across generations. Another factor is trauma. The collective memory of nuclear annihilation shapes behavior long after the event. Fear, distrust, and short-term thinking dominate decision-making. Communities prioritize defense over development, caution over exploration. This psychological legacy mirrors the physical ruins of the world. The war did not only destroy cities, it reshaped how humanity thinks. Fallout also suggests that some regions may be recovering faster than others. The absence of a global perspective makes it impossible to assess overall progress. What appears stagnant in one area may be dynamic elsewhere. However, the lack of evidence for large-scale recovery hints that progress is slow everywhere. No major nation-state re-emerges. No global coordination is restored. humanity remains localized and fragmented. The presence of advanced factions complicates the narrative. Groups like the Institute, Mr. House's regime, and certain Brotherhood chapters possess technology capable of accelerating recovery dramatically. Yet they choose control, secrecy, or isolation instead. This choice reflects a deeper issue. Recovery requires trust and cooperation, not just technology. Without shared goals, advanced tools become instruments of dominance rather than rebuilding. Fallout repeatedly shows that power does not translate into progress. The ability to enforce order does not create prosperity. Stability imposed from above often suppresses the very innovation needed for recovery. The Institute, for example, represents immense scientific capability, yet its isolation and ethical detachment prevent it from contributing meaningfully to the surface world's recovery. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. This pattern echoes the pre-war world, where immense technological advancement coexisted with systemic failure. Fallout suggests that humanity may be repeating this pattern on a smaller scale. Another troubling sign is time itself. 2 centuries pass between the Great War and many of the games, yet the world often looks as if the war happened decades ago. While some exaggeration exists for thematic effect, this stagnation reinforces the idea that recovery is not progressing linearly. In reality, 200 years is enough time for civilizations to rise, fall, and rise again. Fallout's world has not done this. Something fundamental is preventing large-scale renewal. That something may be fragmentation. Without unity, humanity cannot mobilize resources, share knowledge, or plan collectively. Every settlement exists in isolation, vulnerable to collapse. And yet, the fact that humanity still exists at all suggests that recovery is possible, if not guaranteed. Children are born, stories are told, communities endure. Fallout does not present recovery as inevitable or impossible. It presents it as conditional. Humanity is capable of rebuilding, but only if it abandons the patterns that destroyed it. The wasteland shows countless examples of what happens when it does not. The unresolved nature of this question is intentional. Fallout is not a story about the end of the world, but about what comes after, and whether after means growth or endless repetition. The world may be recovering slowly, unevenly, and painfully, or it may be trapped in a long decline, disguised as survival. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Humanity is recovering in pieces, not as a whole. Progress exists, but it is fragile. Advancement occurs, but it is easily undone. The wasteland breathes, but it does not yet heal. And as long as humanity continues to live among the ruins of its past, rather than learning to move beyond them, recovery will remain an open question, not a destination, but a possibility, waiting quietly in the spaces between survival and hope.